I read the story the other day about a woman and her mother that decided to invest in a small computer company back in 1984. Together, they bought about 200 shares each of the stock, and they watched as the price kept fluctuating up and down and up and down. And so on the advice of this woman's accounting professor in college, these two ladies ultimately sold their stock because the professor said that the price would never reach anything higher than $31 a share. The stock they sold was Microsoft. Later on, the woman was interviewed and quoted as saying that she never ever looks at the price of Microsoft stock anymore because if she did, she says it would only make her sick. So on this week's episode of the 5-Minute Break, we're going to discuss our need for some discernment when it comes to accepting the advice of others. Let's go. Hello everyone, and welcome to the 5-Minute Break. My name is Dave, and I have the privilege of serving as the lead pastor at First Christian Church in Arcadia, Florida. You know, I think at one time or another, we have all felt the sting of accepting and listening to some really bad advice. You know, sometimes the consequences of accepting bad advice are nothing more than an irritation or a mild sting. But sometimes, following bad advice can ruin lives. You know, one example of this is found in the book of 1 Kings, chapter 12. You know, the great kings of Israel, David and Solomon, they were now dead, and Solomon's son, Rehoboam, was now the new king of Israel. And he has this amazing opportunity to be a really great king when the people come to him seeking some relief from their tax and labor burdens imposed on them by Solomon. The king tells the people to go back home and then come back in 3 days, and he will give them his decision. Now, to the credit of Rehoboam, he begins by seeking the wise counsel of the elders that once served his father. And they advise Rehoboam in lightening the burden to gain the loyalty and the respect of the people. But Rehoboam ultimately rejects their advice, and essentially he goes and seeks out his buddies, his pals, for their advice. Listen to the horrible advice that they give in 1 Kings chapter 12, verses 10 through 11. The young men who had grown up with him replied, "These people have said to you, 'Your father put a heavy yoke on us, but make our yoke lighter.' Now tell them, my little finger is thicker than my father's waist. My father laid on you a heavy yoke, I will make it even heavier. My father scourged you with whips, I'll scourge you with scorpions." The king decides to follow the advice of his pals and says that he will make the burden on God's people even greater. And the results of his terrible decision would forever divide the kingdom in two. When we solicit advice and counsel from others, we need to use some discernment, and we need to evaluate the advice carefully. Proverbs 12:5 says this, "The plans of the righteous are just, but the advice of the wicked is deceitful." When you get advice from others, you need to ask yourself, is this advice leading me to do the right, the true, and the just thing? Or is it leading me to fulfill my own selfish desires? If it is leading you towards the latter, it might be time to reconsider whom you choose to provide you with wise counsel. Thank you for joining me for another episode of the 5-Minute Break. I hope that if you enjoy and find encouragement from these videos, that you will consider hitting that subscribe button. Or maybe Leave a comment below with some bad advice that you've received over your lifetime. Or maybe share this video with a friend. Don't divide your kingdom because you followed some bad advice. Oh, and by the way, here's some advice you should probably take to heart. Don't fall victim to one of the classic blunders. The most famous is never get involved in a land war in Asia. But only slightly less well known, never go against a Sicilian when death is on the line.